Good morning. So good to be here. This is my first time in Athens and my first time at the Athens Democracy Forum, and I just want to thank Kim and Achilles, and of course my colleague on the editorial board, Serge Schmemann, who helped make this happen, and my other colleagues at the Times. So I have to say, although this is my first time here, everything that I heard and many of you heard last night sounded pretty familiar to anyone who's been watching or participating in the news. We heard about democracy in crisis. We heard about democracies failing to deliver for their citizens. We heard about citizens rejecting what democracies in many cases has on offer. And we heard for sure a hunger for solutions and for the people who are making those solutions happen and creating them, sometimes out of thin air. So that's why I'm so excited to be with this panel today. You all can read more about them in the program, but we have Graça Fonseca, former Minister of Culture from the government of Portugal, who's now started her own foundation. We have Kalypso Nicolaidis from the European University Institute, and Gaëtane Ricard-Nihoul, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, from the European Commission. So I thought I would begin really by asking each of you to talk about an example where the work that you do, bringing citizens more directly into democracy, had an impact on those democracies. We heard the importance of resilience, of democracies being flexible. How have you seen this work actually have an impact in the way that democracies function? Graça, I'll start with you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody, and thanks for the invitation to be here. I would start by saying that there's a music that inspires me since ever. It's called People Have the Power by Patti Smith. And it's something that always inspired me to think about what power do I have as a citizen and what is the power of people. There is a line in that music that I really like a lot. That is, the people have the power to dream, to rule, and to wrestle the world from fools. So I've always believed in this. And yes, citizen voices can lead to change, can lead to meaningful change, can lead to impact, but not always to wrestle the world from fools. And that we know for sure at this moment. And that this means that people, voices can change our world, but not necessarily in the way that we, at least I, would like many times to be the change to be seen. So that's, I think, one of the challenges we have, is the voices can lead to change that that makes our lives better or not. Mm-hmm. And I will give you one example about solutions, because we want to talk about solutions. When I've spent all my life, so I have 25 years of politics. Now I'm in a private-owned agency. But for those 25 years, I've always believed in the power of people. And I've always led citizen engagement initiatives. So for many years, I led participatory budget at local level. I was deputy mayor in Lisbon for 6 years during the financial crisis. And then when I went to government, I designed and led, I think, the first and still today the only one, participatory budget at the national level. So Portuguese government had for 4 years inscribed in its budgetary initiatives and priorities projects that were proposed and voted by citizens. And this was a really huge challenge, because we will be talking about EI and digital world. And we decided that there was no possibility in the first year for people to propose ideas through digital platforms. So the challenge was get out of your couch and discuss with your neighbors, with people that you live nearby in your community, and discuss what would be better for your country, for your region, for your city. Mm-hmm. And people really get to participatory assemblies all around the world. We have this buzz that was the participatory budget buzz that went all around the country promoting assemblies to participation from people. And I will end here because in the first year, the most voted proposal was giving free access to people when they got to 18 years old to all cultural activities, museums, cinemas all around the country. So the idea was when you turn 18, you can go wherever you want in cultural equipments all over the country, free of charge. And this was the most voted one. It was proposed by a group of not teens, but young people. They really campaigned for it. So they went all over the country to campaign for their proposal to be the most voted one, because participatory budget was deliberative. So the most voted one, government had to implement it. So it was mandatory for government. It was just not an idea. We had to implement it. And then one year after, I was nominated Minister of Culture, and one of the first things I did was to transform that proposal from citizens into a public policy measure from government. So now there is one measure from government that is permanent, and it was an idea from citizens. What I want to say with this is, I think people are speaking. I think citizens are speaking, but I don't think we are listening. And what I heard around the country was, it is the first time that someone asks my opinion. And this really happens, and we are a small country, so Portugal is a small country. My feelings is citizens are trying to speak for many years now, but I think we are not understanding the message, and we are losing them. So we need to find new ways to connect with them.
So you made that permanent. Kalypso.
Well, indeed, it is fascinating to hear what you just said, Graça, because the truth is, there is no such thing as democracies, autocracies that we keep on hearing about, and all our conversation here at the Athens Democracy Forum demonstrate that what we have instead is more or less democratic practices in our societies. In fact, this was an insight by Robert Dahl, decades ago, one of the great theoreticians of democracy. So how do we know that we've reached a threshold of democratic practices enough so that citizens feel, and here I give what I like to use as a definition almost of democratic ethos, so that citizens feel that they are writing themselves in the collective stories. Yes, feel that they're heard, but even more, it's more active than being heard. And so we talk about engagement, we use all sorts of words for, we talk about participation. And I think what we're saying here, and we'll say more and more in the coming days, what we say in all our fora, is that there are many ways of writing yourselves in the story which are not the ballot box. Anything but, which include the ballot box, because we're in the 21st century. And so, so what are these ways? In a society where technology, the internet, is so important, they have to include the internet. So for instance, we share the love of Patti Smith, Graça, and we did set up, and in fact, John Lennon also had Power to the People. So we have a webinar called Power to the People with our friends at Europe Calling. I'm speaking here from the European University Institute. We're a coalition of about 30 organizations, and it starts with the webinar, Power to the People. We have thousands of people who registered. That's how you start building something about the voice and all of that. But indeed, Jyoti, you asked us, and we were asked to talk about a specific example. Now, some of us do not have the luck of being right at the center of power, Minister of Culture. But we did create, a couple of years ago, a project and a campaign called the Democratic Odyssey. Why Odyssey? Because, well, it could last forever. Kind of. I mean, it did take Ulysses several decades.
He got home eventually.
Eventually, although Jyoti, he left very quickly after that again. He had the, poor Penelope. Anyway, so the Democratic Odyssey does connect to your role as minister, but it is about a theory of change which marries worlds, which marries the energy of civil society and the power and the service, this is for Colin, the service of those who have in their hands the state, the power of the Weberian state, but who don't think they need to appropriate it. They're serving a public. So the democratic odyssey, first of all, in its ethos, is trying to bring these worlds together, which is not easy. We all know that. Different language, habitus, ages, generations, and all of that. Now, bringing these worlds together to do what? To engage, first of all, in a campaign. In a campaign which argues, which tries to promote the idea that, at least in Europe, but hopefully beyond, we can institutionalize, we can make permanent, we can create a standing body, a standing citizen assembly in Europe. I like to call this citizen power Europe. And that this body would have rotation, randomly selected. We're going to talk more and more about that. Yes, randomly selected, which means that it's not permanent in the sense that of a European Parliament, 5 years, no. Citizens come and go. Their topics come and go. The assembly would, in our dream, be not only helping in policy recommendation, monitoring the state, but also a co-agenda setter. So, and why is so important? Because it would be a standing body. Citizens around Europe maybe would be a bit less Eurosceptic. They would see that they've got, alongside the European Parliament, collaborating very closely with the European Parliament and with the Commission and the Council, but also at every level, governments, local levels, that this body, which would symbolically be theirs. So there is a campaign, but there are campaigns. There are great ideas out there, many great ideas. What we want to do is a kind of proof of concept. I don't really like this term proof, because you never prove anything in the world. But the proof of concept is really a pilot, a prototype, a laboratory, making the assembly happen, not only to demonstrate how it's possible inspired in part, and Gaëtane will have the floor in a moment, but inspired in part by what the Commission and the other EU institutions did, by the Conference on the Future of Europe, panels. Yes, you see, it's possible by the institutions. But we want to marry this with the energies of civil society, with the use of lots of different experiments and methods, using civic arts in the story, theater, marrying this with all sorts of AI apps, mix and matching method, being radically inclusive. So we held our first pilot assembly this very weekend. Some of you in the room and beyond heard that. We were at the Pnika on the hills facing the Acropolis, where the ancient Greeks talked about whether they should go to war or whatever else. We did it with citizens from, we say citizens and non-citizens, migrants and refugees who dream of being citizens. We did it with people from 29 countries from around Europe, with lots and lots of Athenians, because we're also a bit in complement to what is done in Brussels, or saying, hey, our assembly needs to meet all over Europe. So it's a traveling assembly. The concept here, important in democratic theory, translocal. It is translocal. We meet in Athens, we will meet in Vienna, in Florence, maybe Warsaw. We plant democratic seeds, so we've been working with young people to get a youth council off the ground, to help more neighborhood democracy. So in this traveling assembly, we plant seeds, and there will be connections between cities, hopefully reaching also to the countryside. Very ambitious project. And this project, yes, it is horizontal. It's about connecting people across borders who usually never talk to each other, just like the Commission has done. But it's also vertical in that we need to demonstrate impact. Who is listening? We're listening to each other. Let's not always ask who's listening up there who has power. Yes. So it's about listening to each other. But it's also about, hopefully, the powers that be listening. We had many Greek politicians. We've had Commissioner Switcha from the last commission, who was in charge of democracy, and beautifully endorsed the project. And so maybe that's a nice transition to say that we are trying to marry worlds.
Great. Gaëtane.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. First of all, I'd like to I'm very grateful to the Athens Democracy Forum to actually invest time and reflection in this space of democracy in between elections. We don't need to say the importance of elections, especially this year, as you say, but there is a really urgency to rethink that space, and it's not so much about rethinking democracy. Of course, for me, it's really about rethinking what citizenship means today. What does it mean to be a citizen, an active citizen in between elections, when you have this world of polarized social media bubble, disinformation, etc. So it is a space that we need to reflect on, and I'm very grateful that we can do this. And I'm also very happy and proud to share with you what the European Union has been doing in that space for the last years, because I think these were remarkable steps. Some of them were noticed, some were unnoticed, and I really would like to share them with you, because I think what we're seeing there is a true cultural change that seems to be there to stay. And I think we should watch that space, and we should work on it together, basically. What happened, of course, the major and unprecedented, in fact, transnational experiment of deliberative democracy that was the Conference on the Future of Europe. There were democratic innovations in everywhere at the Conference on the Future of Europe. I could talk about it for hours, but I won't. But from there, a lot of things stayed, like the European Commission decided to embed the European Citizens Panels, so these randomly selected pan-European citizen assemblies, into its policymaking process, convening citizens' assemblies, the panels, before the Commission is proposing a legislative or non-legislative act, not all of them, but some of them, and following up on the recommendations. And I think it's very striking now, if you look at the political guidelines of President von der Leyen, or if you look even in the mission letters to all the commissioner designates, you will see that the wording is pretty strong. It's about embedding participatory democracy in policymaking. It's about instilling a true culture of participatory democracy. I think the words are important. And it's about continuing with the European Citizens Panels and following up on their recommendation. And I will come to impact, because I know that was your question. But before talking about impact, I just want to recall why these citizens' assemblies are so important nowadays and why they are helpful for our democracies. And I think they are nurturing three elements that we are desperately missing in our democracies today. The first one is diversity. I mean, when do you actually speak to people who come from a different socioeconomic background, a different country, a different age, different profession, etc.? Not so much nowadays. So we need to recreate these spaces where different people can talk to each other. It's about taking the time for deliberation. You know, the European Citizens Panel meet for 3 weekends. Some of the other citizen assemblies meet for longer time. What's important is to take the time to deliberate, to agree, to compromise, learning how we reach a consensus together, and the word together. It's the three strengths of the citizen assembly. The third strength, is extremely important. We ask people to come up with collective recommendations. So it's not about the sum of individuals, it's a group coming up with common recommendation. And I think these three elements are key. So, of course, you asked the right question. We should not be doing that if it doesn't impact. And I think it has two major impacts, in fact. One that we don't look enough into, I think, is just the impact on people. You know, most of them say it's a life-transforming experience. So when I was talking about active citizenship, it's about to learn to be a citizen. Not everyone knows what it means, you know, so it's extremely important. And the second impact, of course, is on policy. And there are many different types of impacts on policy. I think one is the one you were referring to with participatory budgeting. We had an example like that, for example, in the Conference on the Future of Europe. The subject of mental health came very high. mental health of teenagers in particular. And soon after that, the Commission, it wasn't planned, decided to table a proposal on that. But otherwise, we consider that about 95% of the measures proposed in the Conference on the Future of Europe have had a kind of follow-up in a way or another. But the most impactful, I think, of everything we've done is on citizen engagement itself. I really don't think in every single experience that we did, whether through the Conference on the Future of Europe or the European Citizens Panels, people ask for more. They say, it's working, we like it, we want more. And we heard that, truly. And this is because they push for it, that now we have such strong wording in the political guidelines and in the mission letters of the commissioners designate. And I'm very excited that we are writing a new page of that chapter at the EU level, and be very happy to exchange more on that.
So, all those examples you gave were quite inspiring, but I'm going to play my journalist role for a minute and sort of challenge you based on my own observation. So I'm a citizen of New York City. We have participatory budgeting at the very local level, the city council level, and that's something even my children have participated in through their schools. They've talked about that, lobbying the city council member for things that they as a class decided were important. And I saw them be quite inspired by that. But I've also observed that that process hasn't challenged or changed the fact that in New York we have effectively one-party rule. It's only Democrats, and that has not been great for the city or the governance of the city. And so my question for you is it possible for this kind of work to not simply work within the existing structure, but actually challenge the structure itself? Have you seen that? Is it possible?
In my perspective, yes. Actually, now Lisbon is, just giving the example of Lisbon. Lisbon was really impacted by the financial crisis. I was elected in 2009 for city council. I was there until 2015, so 6 years. And actually what you see in the city now is much of that was a result of the participation and implementation of the ideas of people. Of course, Lisbon is a much more small city than New York. Of course, I'm not comparing. But what I would say is that I always have these doubts. Are we really being able to communicate rightly with people the importance of democracy? Are we really saying to them what is the difference between living in democracy and not living in democracy? Because, we are Western countries, well, here at least, we live in democracies, more or less stable, not saying about if it's going well or good, but bad, but we live in structured democracies in general. But for instance, speaking about Portugal, we lived for many decades in a dictatorship. When I was born, we still lived in the dictatorship, but I was 3 years old, so I have no memories. My only memories is the memories of my grandparents, my father, my mother, but I've never lived that. I was never arrested for my opinion, but many people were arrested for their opinion, and they were incarcerated for 10 years because of their opinion. Are we really telling the story about the difference? Are we really telling the story that now all the young generations use, and we use social media? In Portugal, 50 years ago, you couldn't even write without being arrested. So the thing is, are we really telling the difference of what it means living in democracy? Sometimes I doubt it. And so what I feel is that when you engage in these participatory tools, you really have to fulfill the expectations that you give to people. You cannot just say, okay, I'll give you the voice, I'll give you the power to decide, but then I decide what to do with your decision. And that sometimes is the problem. In our case, in my case, I've always really fought hard to every decision that people made would be implemented. And that gives trust to people to really gain again that feeling that, okay, it's worthwhile to go there to vote and to have a voice and to engage in the movements, for instance, European level or the Odyssey of democracy. But you need to give people the sense that their voice makes a change. That's my opinion.
So I want to bring in this idea, Gaëtane, that you raised about the citizens rethinking their own role, because this is something definitely I've observed and felt, having lived mostly in different cities, but also spending some time, time in small towns, even villages. I often feel that in modern urban settings, there really isn't a lot that's required of a citizen. You vote, maybe, but for the most part, that's it. I mean, have you, Kalypso or Gaëtane, observed people really kind of embracing or rethinking, like, what are the responsibilities of a citizen, demanding more of themselves and not just of their government?
Yes, I mean, as I said, it's amazing the impact it has on how you perceive your citizenship. So we had a citizen, for example, come in from Cameroon and who was a German citizen and suddenly said, oh, I couldn't believe I was considered a European citizen as well, So this kind of the way you perceive your citizenship. We spend a lot of time also preparing with the Populi Institute doing the recruitment to really prepare the screener with them to make sure that the way it is done is very inclusive, so that people feel legitimate to come. Because a lot of the resistance we have is that, but no, why me? Why would I do that? And so we spend a lot of time trying to convince them that, yes, everyone is legitimate. And this has a major impact on people because suddenly they think, okay, my voice matters. And, because in election, you're completely lost in the millions of people and you wonder whether it matters. And there they can see it does matter. And I'm sure that it has a virtuous effect on their citizenship in general. We were talking about, the fact that we need more research on that and more data to prove it. At the moment, it's an intuition we have because we see and we speak to people. But we know a lot, for example, who after that went into organized civil society, which they were not doing before. So yes, I think, as I was saying, it has an impact on the way you perceive and you live your citizenship, which is very strong.
Kalypso, I'd like to bring you into this discussion because of the transnational work that you've done. You've observed this work in many different contexts. Do you think that it works when the idea of citizenship itself is contested? I mean, we're seeing that not just in Europe, but in many different places, places that are multi-ethnic democracies, different languages, different traditions, where one person may not agree with the next person on who is a citizen or who is legitimate. What have you observed?
We observe many things, but one of them is really to echo what Gaëtane just said, that people who come into these deliberative processes, whether it's for specific participatory budgeting or a law or any other kind of output, are changed. You interview them before and after. There are, as Gaëtane alludes to, many social science kind of tracking of that. But the challenge for us is to ask how we amplify this. Because if we're just talking about moments of citizen assemblies, we reach a few hundred, a few thousand citizens. But we are talking here about radical change of our society. And your question before, Jyoti, was about changing the system. You're a revolutionary, maybe from the New York Times, but so
I don't know.
and so, how do we make this link between transformative experiences that citizens go through, seeing that their deliberations can lead to something, more or less, that's one conversation, and then reflecting it in our society? One pathway is simply, if you build it, they will come. That you, in a culture where deliberation is everywhere, starting in school, you're going to decide whether you paint the walls of the class blue or yellow, and everybody decides together at 5-year-old, because they can. right? So you put it everywhere, in neighborhoods, in enterprises, etc. Yes, but there is something in our society which is about power, which is about the commons, the state, the city council. So how do we create structures that people recognize structurally as places where they belong, that they co-create those commons? Not that it's just one moment. And there, I mean, I must say that I just simply would like to share the fact that this weekend, Yves, Mathieu and I were discussing this earlier, also with Constantin, many of us who facilitated this process. We were asking those many citizens, who sometimes were not formal Greek citizens, and that was one issue, of course. And we were asking them, okay, how can you've lived through many crises in the last many years. How can you make it so that Europe will be more resilient in crisis, can face the storms that are unavoidably coming? And what was striking is that, COVID was very important for many people, obviously, that we want to have processes and structures and cultures so that they're in place for the next crisis. We are citizen-centered resilience. We will be asked, and there is collective intelligence. They might not use the jargon, collective intelligence, but they get to this very quickly when they converse. We can together figure out what to do in our neighborhood, what's the best approach. Of course, in conversations with people who have expertise, so-called, but they understand life experience as expertise, that our life experience is the expertise the state needs, the city council needs. But when there's a crisis, there's going to be emergency, and it's too complicated, and we're not going to consult citizens. So let's create these pathways before, and not say, no, in emergency, we leave the students aside. And I think this is about changing society, the culture and the structures that we put in place.
So I want to make sure that we still have time for questions. So before we open it up to our audience, I hope that many of you are already kind of thinking and sparking ideas about how you might bring this back to your own lives, your own communities. So I'd like to ask each of my panelists to just offer the audience either a question to ask themselves, something they can do, or bring back home with them after the panel. Graça?
So I think I would like to imagine a way to reinvent the way we talk about democracy. We need new languages. We need people from arts. We need storytellers. We need creative minds to imagine new ways of talking about democracy. I mean, let's not take it for granted, and I think too many people take it for granted.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's a call to action for the artists in the room. Kalypso?
Ask yourself, how do I join the democratic odyssey? And this is one of the projects that I can join. But yes, that's what
Gaëtane?
Yeah, well, two questions on my side. First, I think we as Kalypso was saying, even if we are doing more and more of these citizen assemblies, is always just a small part of the population. So how can we scale this up? In the European Union, we have also launched this citizen engagement platform, which is meant to be a complement to these participatory processes. But we see that it's difficult for people to actually contribute online. So how can we improve these? We are doing this in already 24 languages. People can post ideas, can exchange between each other. But for some reason, it doesn't take off. So how can you help us to make it take off? And do you have any ideas on this? And my second point is how we really link better the space of this deliberative democracy with the one of representative democracy. I mean, we've already mentioned the follow-up dimension, which is important. What does it mean? What is the commitment that the representatives are making? We need to be clear. It's not replacing it, so we manage expectations as well, but there is a commitment and it needs to be fulfilled. And also how we can make sure that these two words have an impact on each other. Because I think also the representative democracy word could learn from also not only the recommendations coming out of these deliberative processes, but also some of the methods. And I think it's interesting to see how they can improve by looking at each other.
Kalypso.
I just want to add that here we are, 4 women on stage, which is lovely. We had manuals before. And maybe some of our people in the audience might ask, how are our projects connected at the government level, at the EU level, and with civil society coming in different ways? And I think that's a challenge for us, Graça, Gaëtane, Jyoti, really. Also connected transatlantically. We have lots of cooperation with friends in the US, where it's a huge challenge. We'll talk about this later, obviously. Also in Latin America, Africa, in Asia, so globally. So all of these connections, we each have an experience, a project. But we at the Odyssey, work very closely with the European institutions. I was mentioning Commissioner Switcha. We have relationships with all sorts of governments. Governments reach out to civil society. As Gaëtane was describing, the platform, it's all about amplifying each other's initiative. And that's a challenge for us, where also people in the audience who all have amazing projects, many of you, connecting these projects, that's very difficult.
Okay, well, that's a great place. So again, I would like to throw this open, and I think there are some students also who might want to intervene here. Okay.
Yes, thank you. So I had, one question I had is what real powers do you envision citizen participatory movements having? And how do you give these bodies, if you're thinking about citizen panels in the European Union, or a fourth or deliberative permanent standing body in the European Union, what powers do you imagine giving them so that they have real power and are not perceived as, play a cosmetic role, and so that their recommendations are implemented? Thank you.
I'm so glad you brought the word power into this, because that is ultimately the question. Who would like to
How to
take
give
that?
power.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's so much is as much challenging as what you said, Stu. How do we connect ourselves? But in my view, the only way to give power is to prove people that what they decide happens. I always gave this example at the city level to people that when you want your neighborhood to become a better neighborhood, for instance, for kids, you have the power to make it happen, for instance, and you want a kindergarten there, or you want a place where grandparents can go with their grandchild. So you have the power to propose that, to vote that, and then to demand government that it happens. And that's the way to give power. We have this problem of trust. People don't trust politicians. People don't trust politics. That's a fact in all over the world. So to overcome this distrust is a huge challenge. It's hugely difficult. That's why people, for instance, going on digital, it really, nowadays it doesn't work. It's my experience. That's why we always want on physical, face-to-face. Okay, say it in my face. I'm here. You can criticize me. You can say I'm not doing a good job. But you can also say, how can I do a better job? And that's the way to give power, is to make it happen and to say to people that you have the power to change. Because what I listen to every people around the country is politicians are all the same. Why are you different? And it's really difficult to answer this question.
So really sort of inviting that kind of challenge.
Yeah.
The first point is to say simply that it's not always about being given power. Sometimes you take power, and that's what democracy is, in revolutionary context or whatever. But let me say 3 things about this, because there's a lot of fear about citizen washing. This banner's about citizen, we say citizen, but that's what we're saying. Now, 3 points. One is that we've been talking about very concrete policy recommendations. One of the big questions is how to link what citizen assemblies say and direct democracy. Referenda, providing deliberation before referenda, or else they can be manipulated, and following citizen assembly with direct democracy. And in Europe, we have these ECI, citizen initiative. So bringing those worlds together better. That's around specific points. But secondly is the fact that these citizen assemblies are also about agenda setting. And they're also about a kind of Gramscian, if I may, counterpower, bringing civil servants and citizens together, sometimes against lobbies. So, for instance, if you take in the EU the Farm to Fork initiative, it was withered away because big lobbies intervened. There's a whole story about that. Well, maybe citizens in their agenda setting can be a counterpower in this. And there are many other examples. But the third point I would like to make is that power is shared when you have the radicality of sunlight, when you have democratic panopticon, when the gaze of empowered citizen is there. Sunlight, simply the fact that citizens see and comment on what is happening, even before you get to recommendation, is key.
I know we're getting the time notice.
Sorry, I just want to say, because I mentioned the fact that we still needed to work on the follow-up, etc. But I am also a very pragmatic person, and I think that at the moment we are getting there, and we are getting there. I mean, it's quite impressive. I want to contest a bit the cosmetic aspects, because if you look now, for example, at European citizens panels, we have a follow-up phase. Of course, it's not as visible as you can see when the assembly is actually being convened. But for example, we just had a panel on tackling hatred in society, which is quite a big topic, and with very powerful recommendations. Very concretely, what does it mean afterwards? We meet with the other services in the European Commission, and we have this table. And one by one, each recommendation, what do we do? And we launch an administrative process, and we work together on these recommendations. So I don't think it's cosmetic. This is quite big, You were not aware of the European Commission. You receive a call. You are randomly selected, and the day after, you have an impact on the policy of the European Commission. I don't think that's cosmetic, And I think we should also value that more and speak about that because it's not nothing. And I think it's powerful when you are embedded in a policy-making process. Maybe it's less revolutionary. Maybe it's less, I don't know, very shiny. I don't know. But it works. And I think it's important to recall that.
Okay, great. So thank you so much. And with that, I will hand things over to my colleague, Pamela. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry.
Yes.
First.
Tim? First?
Yes, first I just would like to call the teen to come up and give their teen hack. You could stay seated for now. Oh, they're sitting there? Okay, yeah. So I think they'll be intervening from the audience.
From the audience. That's great.
Is this? Yep, perfect. Thank you so much. I think we're very, very grateful to be here, and we're very grateful. Oh, we're very grateful for this opportunity personally as a young person to attend and engage with such a fascinating panel. We are very, very grateful. So my question is, basically, as individual members of the panel, what have you done to bring young people under the age of 18 into democracy and the democratic process? What impact has this had, and what benefits could bringing young people into the democratic process to a greater degree bring? Thank you.
Okay. So, under 18.
Well, in the Democratic Odyssey, we have members from 16 onwards, very much like the European Commission's panels. Some of us dream of bringing 12-year-olds. In Ireland, they just had a youth assembly, much younger. So I strongly believe that all of these assemblies, if you ask me, should go down to 12 and maybe even younger. Because after all, this whole story, our stories, if I may, not speaking in the name of a minister or a commission, but it's about not only intergenerational dialogue, but intergenerational justice. The distributive deals and bargains that are made between generations are invisible, including generations that are not born yet. So thank you for the question, because to me, this is the core challenge of what we're trying to do.
When in Lisbon, we also did a participatory budget at the school level, between 6 and 10 years old. And it was really amazing because we work with them in how to vote, what is a vote, how to cast the vote, and they had to vote for the projects that they wanted to be implemented. And one of the things that I learned with kids at that time was that they are much less individualistic and actually egoistic than adults, because all the projects that were voted by kids were to make it better for collective communities around school. For instance, one of the projects that won was a project to have a space for grandparents to be with their grandsons, because they lived alone. So it was a way to break loneliness of older generations and to be closer to their grandsons and granddaughters. And I really felt at that time that you can change it when you start to work with them really between 6 and 10. They are still not adolescents. They are still in that age where they want to learn, and they are very critical. And so, in my opinion, it was the most grateful experience I had, was to work with them and to see how they can really change how we grown-ups see the world.
I think that's such a great question also, because I've observed that at that young age, 12 or younger, children really have no idea of identities of political party. At that point, they really are looking at their own communities and what matters to them. So I think it's so powerful to bring people in at that age.
So maybe just to confirm that in the European Citizens Panel, it starts at 16, and there was also a very conscious political decision to slightly overrepresent the youth. So in all the panel, we have 1/3 of people between 16 and 25. We will soon launch also a pilot of a youth assembly, actually, on pollinators in the environmental sector. And we also have maybe Colin Cicluna from who worked with Vice President Suiza, could talk about the children participation platform. So there were also attempts to reach out to the even younger. And it was actually one of the recommendations of the panel on tackling hatred in society to try to use the format of this citizens panel in schools. And so we are thinking of creating some material for teachers to use this method also in a school context.
And one point that I see a young person I know waving at is that in collaboration with EU institutions, we're hoping that meeting in local places, like now in Athens, will help create planting the seeds for youth councils across Europe. So, and we're already doing this in Athens with the young people who participated in the story. I think it's worth really echoing what Gaëtane just said, the European Parliament, we're also talking about creating a permanent youth assembly on biodiversity. And that will be pretty revolutionary.
And do we have time for another question? One more question from the teens. Great. Okay.
Hello. Thank you for having us. My question revolves around specifically the age of children. Do you think it has to do with the level of maturity for a child to participate in such events, or is it a specific age that if adults all this time have been thinking that is not appropriate to participate?
If there's appropriate age.
Yeah.
I just want to, for me, it's not that there's an age which is not appropriate, it's more the differences of age you may have in an assembly that may complicate. So if you have, I think it's why I like, if you want to involve younger people, it's probably better first to do that as a youth assembly and you start very early. Because then it becomes, the way you reflect and exchange at 12 is quite different than when you're 30. So, but we felt that 16, and maybe we could even go to 15, I don't know when, or teenager, I guess it could work as well, but we felt that there was a need that, to have an exchange. 16 seemed like a good age to us, but it doesn't mean that we cannot think of models that would start, as Kalypso was saying, probably from, 10, 11 maybe.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I will say that I think the sense of urgency that young people bring is something that's probably quite welcome in many of our democracies that change perhaps too slowly for young people today.
Let me just say that I think the age between 6 and 10, it's much more challenging, of course. They are in elementary school, but they are so much more attentive and receptive to all new things coming. They are they have no filters, which is great. So they say everything they think, which is really a good experience. And I think it's a good age because it's previous to adolescence, which is, of course, we know not so smart age at many times. And they really are receptive to receive new things. And it's that age where so many things then just lasts all over our lives, if we think about it, right? So in my opinion, it's really important to work at those ages.
Okay. All right, I think we will leave it there. And I will now hand this off to my colleague, Pamela Paul, columnist at the New York Times. She will take it from here. Thank you.